do something that stands out, that's personal and customizable, that speaks to your company and what you're about, that you have the majority of people behind, that you can go deep into that. So if you decide that it is women, or you decide that it is the next generation and how you're going to revamp your internship program, it doesn't have to be big things. It could be small things that are meaningful. Those little small things will add up.
I am honored to have a special guest on with me today. Jodi Brokington is here to share with us about her work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, Jodi, tell us about your company.
Well, Nira Consulting has been around for a while. It has morphed into things like my life. I am biracial, so I think I've been doing the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff from birth for my family and friends to kind of come together. So you never have to guess who's coming to dinner at our house. And then it has turned into my work. And I do strategy, advising, and program project development in the diversity space. It was not what I had originally set out to do, but it seemed to be where it has led me. And then definitely with this most recent stuff that's going on in our world, it kind of came to an actual title, what people do. But I work with Fortune 500 companies, startups, individuals, and a lot of folks in fintech where diversity seems to be the most challenging because of some systemic racism stuff that has happened, right? Like just we were not in that industry. To, now making sure in schools that we're being educated properly. And then really where the customer of mine comes can be on either end, the actual corporation. It could be a nonprofit who is trying to make sure that they get folks into that industry. So I work with the National Urban League, for example, with their business executive exchange program, bringing executives from specific companies. This year it's UPS, Honda, and Boeing who get to ascend upon 10 different schools, one being USC, which we hold connections to Nakima as a PWI and Temple, and then the rest are HBCUs to really, go deep into a relationship, teach them about early career stuff. So that's more of the programmatic pieces. And then just bringing great speakers to companies at different parts and times in the year, some that go with the traditional calendared, Women's History Month. We're now in Black History Month, although Black History Month, you and I would agree, is every day that we wake up.
Every day.
And, and then LGBT. Yeah, I'm all of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
it's
let's
just,
back up a
yeah,
little bit, Jodi, so we can unpack some of what
sure,
you shared. So you
sure.
talked about what your company does. You work with some amazing companies and organizations. How did you get into this work in the first place? Because you said you didn't set out to focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and yet here we are, and you're doing big things. So how did you get into this field?
I think it's mostly, as my father called me, my professional volunteerism. I would volunteer in college. They're like, oh, who wants to go to this, youth prison and mentor some kids? Me. But I would notice that the kids that we were mentoring looked like you and me, and most of the people going from my school did not. Right. So I kept interjecting myself into spaces where a lot of folks of color and or those who are just different, maybe women, maybe just someone else, wouldn't feel comfortable, where I knew we, Black people, were being served, but not by us. I wanted us to still lead by example. So UCLA, for example, where I did go undergrad, they have Unicamp, which is really powered by volunteers of students. And all the kids are mostly Latino and Black, but most of the students are Caucasian and Asian, which is fine. But I wanted them to see us. So I then started bringing the fraternities. I brought athletes up, even though they might not be there the whole entire time. But I wanted them to see that Black people go to UCLA too, that we are part of this community. So anytime that was, and I didn't realize that was going to turn into my consulting firm and turn into my career. But, whether or not you're joining an ERG and helping develop those.
What's an ERG for
An
our listeners?
ERG, yes, is an employee resource group. So when you work in a larger company, it doesn't have to be a corporation. Nonprofits have them as long as they're large enough. A resource group that you are like, right? So you and I could join the women's ERG, Black ERG, but the goal is to also join something that you're not part of. So when I worked at Merrill Lynch, for example, I joined the LGBTQ group, the ERG, because my boss was one, I wanted to understand him better culturally. And I wanted to understand how, at that point, Merrill Lynch was serving the LGBTQ community in finance, right? Like what they need and what they want is different. So my firm is very specific in terms of being very customizable. So even though you and I kind of look alike and we're also kind of different, right? And what a solution that you need is not the solution that I might need. So really customizing and drilling down to from start soup and nuts and someone who might be down the road some and been doing the DEI stuff for a while, you need a zhuzh, you need something new, even though it's some of the same story. We hear now how people want, when's this DEI stuff going to be over? Never. It's never. It needs to be part of your DNA. And so I am here. I know I will be able to work till the end of my time in this space because it's that important. But I really fell into it from being who I am, being exposed to all different cultures, traveling the world young and still now older and wiser, but trying to really bring people together who can make a difference. That we realize too that we can't do everything on our own. We do
Right.
need allies. We do need each other. Sometimes there's more controversy and conflict within groups than there are without, because you just get accepted as being a Black female outside. But, sometimes I'm asked, how Black are you? Right? Like, do you get it? You don't understand this. You don't know what this song is. And I'm like, is my Blackness defined by a song I do or do not know, or a game I do or do not play?
Well, I
So
wanna talk about that for a minute.
sure.
As a biracial Black woman, have you had experiences that have reinforced some of the messaging, some of the lessons that you teach and that you train on when you go out to these companies and organizations? So tell us a little bit about your own experiences, whether you had any wake-up call moments or moments that reminded you that many folks in this world have not evolved when it comes to race, and then how did you channel those experiences into the power of your work?
Yeah, no, I think that there's always so many assumptions made, right? I get off a plane in Puerto Rico, suddenly I'm Puerto Rican, and they're like, Mira, Mira, because no one's asked me anything. And then they hear my accent, and I'm like, oh, I do speak enough Spanish to speak enough, but I'm like, I'm not Latina. I am actually half this and half that. Like, you have to go into the explanation. I think
Mhm.
if people take the time to go one question deeper, like, people ask you, where are you from? And they'll say New York. They're like, no, where are you from? Right. That double entendre. And that's when they're trying to ask you who you really are. And some
Mhm.
people don't do that. And especially in the corporate setting and especially publicly, even ourselves. I think often we assume that people are going to assume things about us. And so you kind of put on some armor, right? Well, oh, there's going to be a microaggression today. Oh, someone's going to say something about how well I speak or, where
They're
are you
gonna call
from?
you articulate, right?
Come on. And that's a microaggression in itself, right? So
Well, how?
it,
I mean, some of our listeners would say, "Hey, I think that that's a compliment to call you articulate." So break down for us why that's considered a microaggression.
Yeah, because when you tell me I'm articulate, you're telling me that I'm different than other people like me, or you kind of connect with me more, that I'm at your level, whatever that is. What's not articulate? Like what wouldn't make me articulate? Or when people say, "Oh, you're so educated, where'd you go to school?" I play with that sometimes. I'm like elementary school, junior high school, college, undergrad, grad school 3 times. Which school? What do you want? Like, like, let's really like,
Like, you got
I
all
got a lot of degrees.
the
Like, what are you
you
talking
ready
about
for the
here?
smoke. That's what
Right.
I hear. You got all the credentials, ready for the smoke. You like, "I got my black card. Don't come for me." That's what I hear in your
But
confidence.
they come for you anyway. I mean, there's times, like I said, I'll hang out with a lot of my friends. Most are Black. But I don't do I was not in some of the circles or in the days. I don't play bid whiz. I'm not really a card player at
You
all.
don't play bit Jody.
No, but my friends
I
did.
don't
My
either.
father was the king of it. I know dominoes like no other, but I'm not. That's
Yes.
just my thing. Like I was doing more active things, the stuff that you sit down. I don't bowl either, which I don't know if that's so much. But to me, being educated in sports and what it's done for Black Americans is like, that's part is reading and part is experience. I feel like I was part of the Black gymnast movement. So me and Big Les back in the day, there were probably like 5 Black gymnasts when we were gymnasts.
Wow.
We are so proud now to see Fisk University have an entire team and that there are Black women across the country on mainstream PWI teams as well. Hence why I went to UCLA to walk on. I hurt my knee instead, tutored athletes. But, you see a progression. I've been part of that, part of this movement, but silently and not knowing it, right? So I went to private school. I was one of 5 Black kids. We wouldn't
What
always
school
end
did
up.
you are you comfortable sharing what school did you go to?
Sure, I went to Bank Street School for Children. It's a private school here in New York City. It's mixed grade, and all of the teachers come from Columbia University Teachers College. And,
Oh, a lot of
at the
academic rigor as a child too. I
oh,
went to boarding
correct.
school also, but in
See,
North
yeah.
Andover, Massachusetts.
So
Like,
boarding school even takes it to another level. This was more like fruits and berries, granola folks. But, I got teased there. They said I must be adopted because I had a babysitter pick me up who did not look like me. They never saw my father. In high school, I had you asked for stories. I wrote what I did that summer was the assignment. And I said, I went here on this vacation and I went on this cruise and I got a bad grade, which I had never had in my life from this teacher. And she goes, "I wanted factual, not fictional." And I'm like, "I did
what?
all these things. Like, this is where I went on my vacation. Like, maybe that's not where you think all Black people go on their vacation, but I went to these places. I went to Europe. I went to." And,
So
my
what happened?
my parents went to parent teacher night because it was right after that, and my parents both introduced themselves, and I think her, face hit the ground. My grade did not change. I had to do extra credit to bring my grade up, which my parents are always for. So, but sometimes that's the struggle, right? You gotta say something and then do something about it, or the idea that we're always having to do more, right?
Mhm.
To do a little bit more than everyone else to get ahead, and then we don't get paid as much either, right? But we have to do
Right.
more. So,
So, did you have other experiences as well outside of that ridiculous experience of someone undermining your truth because of the assumptions that they made about who you are and what you're capable of doing?
all the time, even I wanted to go get my PhD, hence my 3 masters instead. And I went and spoke to about 5 different Black women who had done the thing, like their PhD, they're amazing. And they were like, "Oh, you don't really wanna do this." It was kinda like, "You can't join this club." It's kinda and I'm like, "Really?" And it kinda deterred me, and I kinda felt like, "Oh, do I really need this?" My catalyst was sitting on a panel with folks like you that have their PhD, and they'd be like, "Oh, Dr. Armstrong, Dr. So and so, Jodi, Dr. So and so." And I was like, "And you're no smarter than me, and I've applied it, like, you've theorized about it." So, I think often it's not the idea that I really need to correct people. I think it's the idea that they need to experience that not all qualifications and checking boxes get you ahead. That part is connections, part is your own knowledge base, and then your thick skin. Like, how long can you stay in it to win it? And I'm here to win. Like, I get a no, but that's not a no. That's for like no for right now because I didn't translate or say it to you properly for us to connect or for you to want to open the door or do that next thing.
Mhm.
And that's what my goal is, has been as a person for other people. Although biracial, my mom is the white component of my family. And she is really probably the bra burner, the women's lib activist, and everything else that's probably given me my fire.
Mhm.
And, she said in this world, white people need help, believe me, but they're going to get it. So whenever you're in a situation, Jody, she said, it's your job to help Black people and specifically Black women. She goes, "And if there's no one else around, then you just go women next." Like, she had like a hierarchy, but she's telling me this
Wow.
at like 7 when you don't really get it. And
That's
my dad
amazing.
on the other side, when you ask, like, how did I fall into this? He worked at home box office. He's no longer with us. But as a director, he would see things. I wanted a nose pierce. He's like, "You'll never get a job." He was doing kind of at that point, diversity was more quotas right, than it is now of looking really for the best talent. They were just trying, and I remember him, he wasn't joking, but he said, if I could, and this is back in the day, so I will translate, but if I could find a Hispanic, handicapped woman, veteran, I don't have to work for the rest of the year in this diverse, like, and it wasn't even a thing yet. It was just something that they were trying to do. And now I could definitely find enough Latina, disabled, special abled, LGBTQ women who are doing the do, right? Like, and the fact that that is something that maybe I don't know, they're not my closest friends, but I can get to them. If you want Asian, female, tech, this, that, and I can find them. So, I've added sourcing. So we added sourcing to and diversity sourcing and recruitment to what my firm does too, because of that, because I have a wide network. So
So, on that
I,
so let's talk
yeah,
about that for a minute.
sure.
Let's say that you find a person with the qualifications, who also is a person from a racially and ethnically diverse background, and you connect them with the company. How do you prepare that individual for what they might be walking into, especially if it's a predominantly white environment that is not used to having people who look like you and me come through the door with thinking about your degrees, your intelligence, and how your parents prepared you for the world? When other folks don't necessarily have that level of preparation, but they want to be in those positions, how do you prepare them for what they might experience?
Yeah, well, I do a lot of coaching, and some of it is really going in and out of those kind of groups, whether like just events, trying to really get to know these companies, especially now with, since COVID, pre for me, but a lot of online. You don't always, volunteer for companies first, like they're doing a 5K run, hand out the oranges, the water, see how people are really enjoying themselves, see what they really say about their company while they're doing something that's not work, right? So that corporate social responsibility piece, like what are people doing? What do they think of their company? But specifically for an environment, I'm not going to bring anyone or introduce them to a company that's not serious about what they say, right? Often I've worked in house and out, mostly out. And in house too, everyone's rallying. We want more women. We want more this. And then you bring them those candidates and you still have to translate like why, right? So take yourself. You have enough degrees, you've been places, you teach. Like you teach other people so they can get their degree. And but you start your trail is a little longer. It didn't happen as quickly for you. You didn't get that introduction and that tenure right away, right? You had to struggle and fight for it and do some extra. So same kind of translation of someone who's trying to get into the C-suite or even an SVP or director role. They want X years of experience that you probably had, but at a lower level based on a title, not that you weren't doing the work. So I have to reprogram the HR folks, the hiring manager, and also in the process from those companies include diversity, right?
Mhm.
Like they know they're entering a company that is mostly mainstream folks. A lot of people don't look at like them, and especially at the level that they're going to be placed. So they're kind of already used to that by the time I've seen them. I do help with externships with Paragon One, so helping younger folks sooner, like in college and internships all the way to the C-suite and on boards in terms of my recruitment and placement. But most people mid-career and above have been the lonely only or the one of few. So they're used to that, but they want to know and they want to see. They're expecting to see. I better if they're Latina, I better see someone Latino or Latina in some part of the process. They don't have to be the big dog or somewhere, but there better be someone or at least another woman if you're a woman and I'm not saying staging it, but these should be people that they are going to be interacting with anyway. And often I will try to, set up one-on-one calls with people within the company who are of color, who are women, who are of the same background and also background meaning in terms of their industry. So if they're going in for compliance, they're meeting other compliance folks and lawyers and other people in that realm. If they're tech, I want them to speak to other people who would be doing the same kind of work and what it was like in their process. I try to make sure I'm also plugging them into companies that do have the ERGs, that are doing corporate social responsibility and might support some of the organizations they're part of, like Alpha or National Black MBA or
Mhm.
Lesbians Who Tech. so that they see that this company, it's not just, oh, I'm going to be one of few, but you have the opportunity to bring other people with you as you get in. Some are already there, and there's some places for you to plug in for resources. Like you
Now,
never
what
so much
happens,
just
Jody, if you're trying to bring other people along with you, but the company gives the impression there's only room for one of you? And we see that happening, where one person, okay, we can allow that one person, but now there's 5. That feels like a threat. So, how do you strike a balance for those folks who wanna bring others along, but some of the companies just are not receptive to that?
yeah. I don't think that they're not receptive. I think that they're just used to their ways. Like not adding someone of color or even a diversity interview as part of the process. I think it's the idea that, wow, I didn't realize that there were so many. Like sometimes it's a reality check on the other side. And I think it's also the expectation. Like, just because I am a spook who sat by the door. I am that person who's going to bring people in, but that's not everyone's MO. And often when you first get a role, I try to, say that not everyone's going to be so open for you to be opening up the gate doors for all your people to come through tomorrow, to be
Mhm,
patient. Often, a lot of folks that I work with also can bring people into their teams sometimes.
mhm,
And that's one of their opportunities to do so without it being such a big deal. But to be patient, to know that that will happen, and to really work internally to see who's already there to bring up versus bringing people from the outside. Often we need to be recognized from those at the top to get the, referrals to be put into some of the leadership training groups, right? They're for women and they tend to be more heavily white women than women of color because that's who's getting the promotion, that's who's being thought of. So to be more thoughtful that way, to not rock the boat as much, but to rock it where necessary. And once you're there long enough and you've proven yourself, they kind of let you do what you want because you've been producing. So it's like any role. So I
mhm.
never say never, but sometimes it will take more time than you think. So
So,
that's
someone like me would probably need a lot of coaching in the sense of knowing to quote unquote not rock the boat, because that's more of my MO in the sense of trying to shake things up, right? When I see complacency, business as usual, and knowing that there are a lot of folks who are talking the talk, but they're not walking it. And
and I
that's I have
right.
to
And
bring
let
them
me rephrase for you, Nikema. It's not that I don't want you to rock, it's how you rock the boat and
right.
when you rock the boat,
So I
right?
should not try to shut down a company meeting if I'm seeing discrimination. That's the
Correct.
suggestion that
Well,
I
there's still ways to shut it down without it.
uh-huh,
You still need it to complete because votes still need to happen, things, but you want them in your favor, right? So it's also finding your champions, your allies.
so
I think when I
strategic,
was,
in other words. Be
yes, very
strategic and keep
strategic
one
as to
goal in mind in a situation like that.
correct.
So let's switch gears a little bit, because I wanna talk about something that happened, here where I live. I live in Minneapolis, and now most people understand that Minneapolis is the place where George Floyd was killed by the Minneapolis Police Department.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that happened in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed was that we saw an unprecedented number of companies and organizations vowing to address the quote unquote diversity problems within their companies, vowing to put money towards various initiatives to help level the playing field, vowing to change some of their policies and practices, and to expand their hiring practices to be more inclusive. What was your experience as someone who owns a DEI company, diversity, equity, inclusion, for those who are listening and don't know what that means? What was your experience during that time after George Floyd was killed, and how you were approached by companies, or whether you saw an increase in their desire for your services?
Yeah. So at the time I was in house, I still had my company going. A lot of folks were really trying to strategize, what can we do? Like we thought we were doing some of this right. Like so those who were in DEI doing the do already were like, well, I thought I was doing the right thing, right? Like I thought we were on the right track. Where
Mm,
did we lose connectivity? Like, what, like, how does something like this happen? Right? Under my watch, where I feel like I've been following all the rules. I've gotten a diversity award for this. Like, the people who've been doing it for a minute before it even had full titles, right?
mhm,
Then you had the wake up calls, right? The folks that have never done anything, and the good hearted folks that, my company just happens to be diverse, right? And some companies happen that way. They are. And so diversity is not an issue, right? We're all colorblind, but they know better, right? But didn't have anything in place, right? And then the people like, do we actually put a statement out? Do we not put a statement out? If we don't put a statement out, how do we look in comparison to our competitors? How much do I say? What do I do? In most cases, the majority of clients that I had, and even where I was working at the time, definitely had forums, allowed the Black employees of their companies to really speak out, and had smaller forums, some that were specific just for them, Black only group, so that they could let their hair down and beards down and do their thing. Still monitored, and with, resources. You saw that almost every company was adding mental health resources to their benefits, and not that they didn't have it before, but they added meditation, they added small groups, they added coaching for that if you needed it, and even joined groups and organizations and made investments in, like, mental health facilities that specifically were for folks of color. And so once again, there is no one solution, right?
right.
You might need therapy. I might need a group. I might need actually to go and put myself away for, like, maybe it really impacted me. I lost my son, something really tragic. I think it was good to hear the various voices. So parents of kids, of male kids speaking out of what that's like every day. Some of the Procter and Gamble really powerful videos about perceptions of people, and really just keeping things out there. The CEO, you know, conglomerate folks that came together from corporate America, they were serious about it. They don't like what's going on either, but there is no one solution. So it's
Mhm,
finding the best practices and then kind of formulating it back to what's going to work for your company in Minnesota. It might not work down the street, even in Wisconsin, right?
mhm,
Like, it's close, it's cold, but we do things a little differently here, or
right.
we're further down the court. And everyone, I get, my analogy is like a track meet, a track field, that every company has a different pace for each one of their intersectionality of their cultural groups. So
Well,
most
the
people,
pace
go ahead.
in America, unfortunately, when it
Yeah.
comes to a lot of civil rights and racial justice issues has been with all deliberate speed, as they said, in Brown versus the Board of Education, which is a really, really slow, intentional
Process.
pace when it
Mhm.
comes to progress. So have you seen those companies continue on the pace that they were on, back in June, July, August of 2020? Or have you seen that fervor sort of wane as people have, come back to work after COVID, as, they kind of think about George Floyd, but really it's more business as usual. So have you seen a
Yeah.
shift and take place, or do you see consistency amongst those companies that engaged you in your work and who wanted to change the way that they were handling, diversity, inclusion, and equity?
I would say it's a mixed bag, that some definitely, like, are continuing to push ahead, invest more, actually hire a full staff, put more money behind it that's really necessary. But you see that there's some quiet quitting, especially in the CDO roles, so the chief diversity officer roles, or whatever, the lead global head of impact. Like, there's 80 titles now, which I love too, because I'm like, oh, I can create a new title if I go back in house. I could be like a 40-person thing outside mine. But it's the idea. So some people are really pushing forward. They're like, yo, we're gonna truly be these champions. And my company did sign off on all these things. And we're not just checking boxes, we're about it. Right. So that's
Wow.
on one extreme. Then
Mhm,
you have those who never changed to begin with. George Floyd, no George Floyd. They're like,
mhm,
and size and, location. international, US, doesn't matter. It's just like, we're just gonna keep business as usual. We're happy
Their
we
culture.
survived COVID, right?
Mhm,
And then in the middle, which is the best space, there's some people who are still there. They're really gonna push the women's piece, or they're really pushing the disability piece or the LGBTQ. And if you happen to also be in some of those intersectionalities and you can add a cultural lens of black and brown, or the AAP space, what your company needs, right? So I said, for example, National Urban League is my client. They're mostly higher and most of their staff are Black. So for
mhm,
them, diversity is anything that's not really Black.
mhm,
Right, and that has increased, like, they've always had a diverse group of folks working there, but the majority is Black, right? So,
mhm,
everyone's working from a different lens, and then those who are startups that are very conscious in the work that they're doing, like Paragon One as one of my clients, they're placing students that are underrepresented and ambitious to go into these corporations 100% remote on purpose, so that way you can get a picture in. You don't have to be exposed to everything right away
right,
and get to know the culture, right? But internally working on their own company's diversity as well, right? Because they have to reflect. They know we don't really right now reflect everything that we're trying to do, but they're working at it like an accordion from both ends.
mhm,
And then, some companies, when I say in this middle piece, they're investing more in their corporate social responsibility to continue to invest in the check way, but following the checks, not blindly. Um,
mhm,
they're starting to pay some of the ERG leadership, which would be you and me working at company XYZ, and you're the head of the women's, I'm the head of the biracial group, someone else is the head of the generation group, but we're spending our time beyond work. So some companies are now investing in that executive leadership group, or maybe there's an annual something that they do and you're the chairperson. And I'm not saying huge dollars, but some investment back on your time. So some
right,
people are investing within their company. So it's another way of professional development. CSR wise, they're paying for their more of their employees to do stuff outside of the company that they don't particularly provide. So joining a national Black MBA, a national urban league, young professionals, SEO, Inroad, like, there's organizations to join, lesbians who tech, like there's groups, but really sending the right people to those things and paying more attention. And I think on the L&D side, so the leadership and development, where people can come together, I
mhm,
feel like that is really where companies are just making their own decisions based on research. Like they've all been doing the numbers, looking at the data, seeing how well their CEO performs, seeing how well people are performing. And then you have this layer of hybrid, remote, back in the office, and things are just getting jumbled. So everyone's just trying to do the best they can. But the name of the game now is retention and the belonging piece. So the DEIB of, how long can we can we sustain? I could get Jody in. How long is she staying? I can hire Nakima. How long is she going to really feel that she's part of this? Are we going to make sure she feels that comfortable? The one person that you said I'm going to place somewhere,
right.
uh, you know, who's
Are they
checking in
gonna
on that?
stay? Well,
Yeah.
after I heard Beyonce's song, "You Won't Break My Soul," like many people around America, it
Everybody,
it
right.
had everybody questioning, "Why am I going to this 9 to 5?" And dealing with some of the layers and layers of issues, right, that happen in the workplace, especially when it comes to people of color. And I would say in particular Black folks. Because
Mhm.
anti-Blackness is a whole other dynamic that, we don't like to talk about, but that creeps in terms of the implicit bias, explicit bias, microaggressions, being denied access to opportunity or promotions, knowing that you're qualified. And so earlier, when you were giving the example of how some companies may focus on women or focus on people who are differently abled or folks who are part of an LGBTQIA affinity group, what is being left out is an intentional focus on Black people, particularly ADOS people, American descendants of slavery,
Mhm.
who are often left behind in the conversation. So, how do you center issues particular to Black people going into corporate spaces in your work?
Yeah. I mean, to me, that's my favorite space just because, always kind of feeling that am I in or am I out? And so never wanting people to feel like they're not part of is important. But sometimes, someone has to be a pioneer, right? We need our Harriet Tubmans to kind of forge the way. And so, some people do have to have the thicker skin and have to be the sacrificial lamb. I mean, we've had, the number of our CEOs change, right? The number of Black folks on boards has gone up, but what roles are we taking? Are we taking the financial roles where we get to actually figure out where the money's going to go?
Mhm.
So it's being strategic. So for me, I think it's the idea that in most companies, the first ERGs created are usually Black ERGs.
Right.
And they usually start by the 2 of us that happen to be there and happen to see each other at a cooler, or I saw you on a Zoom and I'm like, "I'm gonna look her up on LinkedIn and be like, we're gonna" and first it starts as a coffee clutch, but then once the company takes it over, does it have all that same value because they've now given you a budget. And I told you now some people are paying for it. So can you be that? I always joke about the authentic self, not that I joke about it, but the authentic self versus your best self, right? So I think we bring our best selves to most public places, even you and I here today. But there is that authentic self where, yes, I want to sing the Beyonce song, and there's a lot of songs I'd like to sing that, have
On
bleep
a water
at,
cooler.
right?
Uh,
Right? So now too, that layer of not being in the office, you're no longer like, I might not know your name, but I'm like, "Oh, there's that Black woman near the cooler or near near the bathroom that I pass in the cubicle. I should bring her into the ER." Like, I should at least,
mhm.
when I show up at a company, people are like, "Hey, you should do this and you should," but you have to also be open to that. So
Right.
to me, it's hard to push in that space when someone doesn't want to, and there's been if they've gotten pushback before. So it's
Right.
meeting people where they are. Some people are happy just coming to work and going back. They'll fill out the forms, they'll come to the events, but don't ask them to be the, vice president of the ERG, and no, I don't want to do the HBCU a lot,
Right.
a
'Cause it
recruitment.
can feel like a black tax, right? So when I worked in academia, I enjoyed, that experience, especially once I learned to navigate the environment and figure out what is my place here as a young Black woman who is teaching law, right? In
Mhm.
this environment. Once I learned that, I embraced it, I found my lane, but, what I also found was because there were so few Black faculty members, that meant that I am having to respond to almost any and everything that happens to students of color. And that in academia is known as a black tax. And so, how do you inform people, prepare people who are interested in the leadership positions, but who don't know if they can bear that additional
Yeah.
burden of responsibility
Yeah.
by being
Well,
the only or one of the onlys?
I always warn them that you are gonna be asked, and you should eventually do just like if you were gonna get a promotion, right? They're like, "Hey, we're gonna promote you to X." And you're like, "Ooh, I don't wanna work for Jodi. She's not one of the best manager." Like, you find out some intel. So you could say no that time. Then they're like, "Nikema, we have another promotion for you over here." And you're like, maybe that time you're like taking a sabbatical, you want to have a kid, you whatever, you still are like,
Mhm,
that third time comes around, you're gonna have to do something or you will not get another promotion, right?
mhm,
So there's some things you can be willing to say, look, I will join, I will actually even, support from my budget and activity from that ERG. But
mhm,
what I right now want to focus now that I'm new here, want to make sure I have my job. Like, there's
mhm,
polite ways to say no and
mhm.
still be active, like, "Hey, I will speak if they need me to, I will do a train," like, you can offer yourself,
Right.
but not all of yourself, and
Right,
then
and that's called
forget.
boundary too, right?
Right,
You're setting a personal boundary for yourself, you know your capacity, and I think the key is being conscious to what is your end goal. For some
yeah,
people, they're gonna pour that energy into their work so they can keep climbing that ladder and then get in a position where they can bring others along,
mhm,
up that ladder, and then others are more invested in trying to make the environment better, knowing that that is an additional burden of time, additional stress, but also seeing that opportunity. So, as we get ready to conclude our time together, I want to ask, do you have one piece of advice for a company that may be out that may be listening, that perhaps did not answer the call for change in the aftermath of George Floyd being killed, or just knowing that they need to evolve. So, what is one piece of advice that you would give them? And then my second question is, how can people reach you? Whether it's a company or if it's an individual, how can they get in touch with you and learn more about what you
And I think my message is the same for someone who hasn't done anything and someone who's already doing, which is really do something that stands out, that's personal and customizable, that speaks to your company and what you're about, that you have the majority of people behind, that you can go deep into that. So if you decide that it is women, or you decide that it is the next generation and how you're going to revamp your internship program, something that's really going to change your brand, like, it doesn't have to be big things. It could
Mm.
be small things that are meaningful. Those little small things will add up, right? Just do something small, make it meaningful, and go deep. You don't need to talk to every HBCU. Choose one that no one else is going to. Make it your
and build a
school, like own it,
relationship?
be it,
Mhm.
right?
I love that.
Um, and whatever that area is, right? You go double down on those who have, special abilities that right now can work remotely and stay in there, but really give them all the resources they need and shift your company, because the intellectual property that they have, when you get the right population for the work that your company does, can be amazing. And then those who have not reached out to me or my company, you can clearly find us on LinkedIn. So as myself, Jodi Brokington, or Nira Consulting, or niraconsulting.com. It's not an acronym, it's just a name that means of great knowledge and wisdom in an African dialect, and star in another. And that has a long story, but my team and I will reach out to you. And I work with a lot of different consulting firms that, even if my team can't, service you, you will get served some way or another. And I really just say go for it. Like, it's just time to get off the bench for anyone and
Mhm.
do something in this space. And even if it's a
Amen.
personal, like even to the individual, go somewhere. We talked about travel before.
Mm.
You just sometimes have to get out of your own seat to see how other people might not even have a seat. You know,
Right.
I said this
Absolutely.
morning to someone on the subway. I was like, "Hey, it's really cold." And he looked, young guy. He was like, "It's only cold if you think it's cold. You need to get through this." And I was like, "Okay, I am with you. I'm not saying that I'm on the subway. I'm going places, but so
It's
it
the
yeah,
mindset,
yes.
right?
So
Yes.
you can get your mind wrapped around something. There's something small that maybe you and one other employee can start mentoring. You don't need the whole company to do I mentor. You know, it's something that you personally go to the food bank on the weekend, bring his food there. I
Right.
teach fitness at a food bank, or I used to teach fitness to seniors who would be there all day, right? And so make connections, because then you understand more what other people are going through, and your bad day could be someone's best life.
Amen. I love that. Thank you so much for the time that you spent
Oh,
here today. Thank you for your energy, your commitment, your passion, and your expertise at what you do. We'll make sure to put the links to your company as a part of this podcast and make sure that folks know to look you up and to continue to tap into the wisdom and expertise that you have. Thank you so much, Jodi Brockington, for joining us on Justice and Power podcast.
thank you.